The night after Christmas always felt different. The joy and warmth of the holiday seemed to dissipate as quickly as the wrapping paper was torn from gifts. That night, the world felt emptier, quieter, as if the magic of Christmas had taken something with it when it left. It was the same every year in my small town. By the time the 26th rolled around, the streets were deserted, and the houses felt hollow despite their festive decorations. I just returned home after spending the holidays with my family and was looking forward to a quiet night alone. My apartment was small but cozy, the tree still lit in the corner, casting faint shadows across the walls. The first strange thing happened just as I was settling in for the night. I'd made myself a cup of tea and was scrolling through my phone when I heard it, a faint scratching sound. It was coming from the window near the tree. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. My apartment was on the second floor, and the window overlooked a quiet alley. There shouldn't have been anything out there. Setting my mug down, I crept to the window and pulled back the curtain. The snow was falling heavily, blanketing the alley in a soft white glow. At first I saw nothing, but then my eyes caught movement. Just for a moment, I thought I saw a shadow dart across the alley, disappearing into the darkness. I told myself it was nothing, probably just a trick of the light or an animal, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I locked the window and closed the curtain, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. The second strange thing happened a couple of hours later. I was curled up on the couch, half asleep, when the power went out. The room plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the faint glow of the snow outside. "Great," I muttered, grabbing my phone to use as a flashlight. As I stood to check the circuit breaker, I heard something faint, like footsteps on the roof. My building was old, and the roof wasn't easily accessible. My neighbors were all elderly, and none of them were the type to climb up there in the middle of the night. I stopped, straining to hear. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, moving across the ceiling toward the corner of the apartment where the Christmas tree stood. My pulse quickened as the sound stopped directly above me, and then something tapped against the window. This time the sound was loud and deliberate, a sharp, rhythmic knock. My body froze, fear rooting me in place. The knock came again, louder this time. With trembling hands, I lifted my phone and aimed its light at the window. For a moment, all I could see was my own reflection, my pale face staring back at me. And then I saw it. A hand. It pressed against the glass, its long, thin fingers splayed out. The skin was gray and mottled, and the nails were black, jagged points. Slowly, the hand dragged down the glass, leaving streaks of frost in its wake. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. The knocking stopped, but the silence that followed was worse. I stayed there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the window, waiting for something, anything, to happen. When I finally worked up the courage to look outside, there was nothing there. The alley was empty, the snow undisturbed. I tried to brush it off as a bad dream or some kind of prank, but I couldn't shake the unease that lingered. I triple-checked all the locks, closed every curtain, and left my phone's flashlight on as I crawled into bed. The apartment was silent, but I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old building set my nerves on edge. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself I was safe. And then I heard it, the scraping sound. It was faint at first, like something dragging along the walls. It started in the living room and slowly made its way toward my bedroom. My breath hitched as the sound grew louder, more insistent. I clutched the covers, my body frozen in fear. The scraping stopped just outside my door, and for a moment, there was only silence. Then the doorknob turned. It jiggled once, twice, as if someone or something was testing it. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The doorknob twisted again and then mercifully stopped. But the relief was short-lived. A voice came from the other side of the door, a low, guttural whisper that sent chills down my spine. "Why did you lock me out?" The words were drawn out, distorted, like they were being spoken underwater. I didn't recognize the voice, but it was filled with something cold, something ancient. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping it would go away. The silence returned, and for a moment I thought it had. And then the whisper came again, this time right next to my ear. "You can't hide," I screamed, scrambling out of bed and grabbing the nearest object, a lamp from the nightstand. I swung it wildly, my phone's flashlight illuminating the empty room. The door was still closed. The room was empty. But the whisper hadn't been my imagination. I could still feel the cold breath against my skin. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I stayed in the living room, every light in the apartment turned on, clutching the fire poker I'd taken from the hearth. When dawn finally broke, I felt a small sense of relief. Whatever had been here, it was gone now, or so I thought. As I went to the window to look outside, my heart sank. In the snow below, leading away from the building, were footprints. They were large, too large to be human, and they ended abruptly in the middle of the alley, as if whatever had made them had vanished into thin air. And on the glass in the frost was a single handprint. It was smaller than the one I'd seen the night before, but just as chilling. Beneath it, written in the frost, were 3 words, "See you soon." I packed a bag and left that morning, unable to stay in the apartment another second. But even now, as I sit in a hotel room miles away, I can't shake the feeling that it's not over. The night after Christmas, I learned something I'll never forget. Not everything that comes down the chimney is here to spread holiday cheer. The highway stretched out before me, endless and empty. It was Christmas Eve, and I was on my way to my parents' house for our annual family gathering. The drive was long, 3 hours through winding country roads, but the thought of home, warm food, and familiar faces made it worth it. Snow was falling steadily, blanketing the world in white. My car's headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the swirling flakes. The radio played Christmas classics, but the festive tunes did little to calm my growing unease. Something about the night felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I told myself it was just the isolation, the eerie quiet of the road. No one else was out here this late on Christmas Eve. And then I saw him. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. A figure stood on the shoulder of the road, barely visible through the falling snow. I slowed the car, squinting to get a better look. The figure was wearing a red suit, the kind you'd expect to see on a mall Santa. But something about it wasn't right. The suit was dirty, the fabric frayed at the edges, and the fur trim was stained yellow. As I got closer, I noticed the figure wasn't standing. It was swaying, as if caught in an invisible wind. The head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and the shoulders were hunched. My stomach twisted. I knew I should keep driving, but curiosity got the better of me. I slowed to a crawl, rolling down my window just a crack. "Hey!" I called out. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The figure didn't respond. It just stood there, swaying. The closer I got, the more wrong it looked. Its hands were too long, the fingers thin and claw-like, ending in blackened nails. The head turned slightly and I caught a glimpse of its face. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a face, it was a mask. A cheap plastic Santa mask with hollow eye sockets and affixed. The edges of the mask were cracked, revealing dark, withered skin beneath. The figure moved then, taking a single, jerky step toward my car. My instincts screamed at me to leave, and I slammed on the gas, my tires skidding on the icy road as I sped away. In my rearview mirror, I saw the figure step into the road, its head tilting to watch me as I disappeared into the night. The rest of the drive was a blur. My hands shook on the steering wheel, and I couldn't stop glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that thing chasing me. But the road remained empty, the snow falling heavier now, obscuring everything around me. When I finally reached my parents' house, the sight of the warm lights in the windows should have been comforting. Instead, it filled me with a strange dread. The snow-covered driveway was empty, which was odd. My parents and my brother should have arrived by now. I parked and hurried to the front door, my boots crunching in the snow. The house was eerily quiet as I stepped inside, the familiar smell of pine and cinnamon doing little to ease my nerves. "Mom? Dad?" I called out, my voice echoing in the stillness. No answer. The living room was perfectly decorated, as always. The Christmas tree stood in the corner, its lights twinkling softly. Stockings were hung on the mantel, and the dining table was set for dinner. But the house felt wrong, like it was holding its breath. I checked the kitchen, the bedrooms, even the basement. No one was here. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out to see a text from my mom. "Running late. Be there soon. Stay safe. Love you. I let out a shaky breath. Maybe they'd been delayed by the snow. I tried to convince myself there was nothing to worry about, but the memory of the figure on the road lingered in my mind. I decided to wait in the living room, pouring myself a glass of wine to calm my nerves. The hours ticked by and the snowstorm outside grew fiercer. The wind howled, rattling the windows, and the power flickered once, twice before going out entirely. The house plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the faint glow of the Christmas tree. I lit a few candles and sat back down, pulling a blanket over my shoulders. My phone buzzed again, a text from my brother this time. "We're almost there. Save me some eggnog." I stared at the message, a knot forming in my stomach. Something was wrong. My brother never drank eggnog, he hated it. It was a family joke we'd teased him about for years. I texted back asking where they were, but the message didn't send. And then I heard it. Footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, coming from somewhere outside the house. My breath caught and I turned toward the window, peering out into the snow. At first I saw nothing, but then, in the faint glow of the porch light, I saw him again. The Santa figure stood at the edge of the yard, just beyond the reach of the light. He was closer now, his red suit tattered and fluttering in the wind. He tilted his head, as if he could see me watching him. I backed away from the window, my heart racing. The footsteps continued, louder now, coming from the porch. I grabbed a fire poker from the hearth, clutching it tightly as I moved toward the front door. The doorknob rattled, and I froze. "Hello?" a voice called out. It was my brother's voice. "It's me. Let me in." Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by doubt. Something about his voice was wrong. It was flat, emotionless, like he was reciting the words from memory. "Prove it's you," I shouted, my voice trembling. There was a pause, and then the voice spoke again. "Come on, it's freezing out here. Let me in." I gripped the fire poker tighter, stepping closer to the door. "If you're really my brother, what's your nickname for me?" Another pause, longer this time. Then in a low, rasping voice, "Let me in." The doorknob rattled violently, and I stumbled back. The pounding started then, heavy and relentless, shaking the door on its hinges. I ran to the back of the house, locking every door and window I could find. The pounding followed me, moving from door to door, window to window. And then it stopped. The silence was worse than the noise. I stood in the kitchen, gripping the fire poker, straining to hear anything over the sound of my own breathing. A whisper came from behind me. "You've been very naughty." I spun around, and there he was. The figure stood in the shadows of the kitchen, his plastic Santa mask glinting in the candlelight. His long, claw-like fingers reached for me, and his glowing red eyes burned into mine. I screamed and swung the fire poker, but it passed through him like smoke. He laughed, a low, guttural sound that filled the room. "You'll stay with me," he said, his voice echoing in my head, "forever." The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me was the mask, its twisted grin stretching wider as the world around me faded. When my family arrived the next morning, they found the house empty. The Christmas tree was still lit, the table set for dinner, but there was no sign of me. And in the snow outside, leading away from the house, were a single set of footprints, heavy, deliberate, and impossibly long. It was Christmas Eve, and the snow was falling in thick, silent flakes outside. The fireplace crackled warmly in the living room as I sat with my younger sister Lily, watching the soft glow of the Christmas tree lights twinkle in the dim room. The house was quiet, except for the occasional creak of the old wooden beams and the muffled wind outside. Lily, being only 7, was bubbling with excitement. "Do you think Santa will come soon?" she asked, her eyes wide with anticipation. "Maybe," I said, ruffling her hair, "but only if you go to bed soon. You know he won't come if you're awake." She pouted but eventually agreed, reluctantly trudging up the stairs to her room. I stayed behind, finishing the mug of hot chocolate I'd made earlier and soaking in the festive silence. The house felt peaceful, wrapped in a blanket of snow and Christmas cheer. But as the clock struck midnight, that peace was shattered. It started with a sound, a faint, distant scraping, like something heavy being dragged over stone. I froze, listening carefully, trying to convince myself it was just the wind rattling against the chimney. but the sound grew louder, more deliberate, echoing through the flue like claws scratching at the bricks. My stomach tightened. I knew we didn't have a functioning chimney flue. It was sealed years ago. The fireplace was purely decorative now, its warmth coming from an electric heater hidden behind the logs. No one, not even Santa, should have been able to use it. The scraping stopped, replaced by a low, hollow thud, then another and another. Something was descending the chimney. I grabbed the poker from the hearth, my heart pounding. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. "Is someone there?" For a moment there was silence, broken only by the faint hum of the Christmas tree lights. And then I heard it, a deep, wheezing breath. I stumbled back as a blackened boot emerged from the fireplace, followed by a gnarled leg wrapped in tattered red fabric. The figure that followed was not Santa, not the jolly bearded man from Christmas tales. This thing was wrong. It was tall, impossibly so, its frame hunched and skeletal. The red suit it wore was filthy and torn, hanging loosely from its emaciated body. Its face was hidden beneath a hood trimmed with matted yellowed fur, but from beneath the shadow of the hood, two glowing red eyes stared out, piercing and unblinking. The thing wheezed again, its breath rasping like the sound of air through broken pipes. As it fully emerged from the fireplace, its head tilted to the side, jerking unnaturally as if it were studying me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. "Merry Christmas," it rasped, its voice deep and distorted like it was coming from somewhere far away. Its mouth, barely visible beneath the hood, stretched into a grotesque grin, revealing teeth that were jagged and yellowed, like shards of broken glass. It took a step forward, the floor creaking beneath its weight. The smell hit me then, a rancid, sickly sweet stench that made my stomach churn. It was the smell of decay. I stumbled back, clutching the poker like it was the only thing keeping me alive. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice breaking. The creature stopped, its grin widening. "You've been good this year," it hissed, dragging out the words as if tasting them. "Haven't you?" My mind raced. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. It was a nightmare, a hallucination. But the heavy thud of its boots on the floor, the stench of its breath, the cold air that seemed to cling to it, it was real. I thought of Lily upstairs, asleep and unaware. I had to protect her. The creature moved again, its long, spindly fingers curling as it reached for the Christmas tree. It plucked an ornament from a branch, holding it up to its face as if inspecting it. Then, without warning, it crushed the glass ball in its hand, the shards falling to the floor. "Not enough," it muttered, its voice low and guttural. "Not enough cheer." It turned its glowing eyes back to me. "Where are the others?" My blood ran cold. It was looking for more people. "No one else is here," I lied, gripping the poker tighter. "It's just me." The creature paused, its head tilting again. For a moment I thought it believed me. But then it sniffed the air, a long, deliberate inhale that made its chest rattle. Its grin returned, wider than ever. "Lies." It moved toward the stairs. "No," I screamed, rushing forward and swinging the poker with all my strength. The metal struck its arm with a sickening thud, but the creature barely flinched. It turned to me, its grin twisting into a snarl. "Bad children don't lie," it growled, and its hand shot out, grabbing me by the wrist. Its grip was cold, impossibly strong, and its touch burned like frostbite. I cried out, struggling against its grasp, but it tossed me aside like a rag doll. I hit the floor hard, my vision swimming. By the time I regained my senses, it was already halfway up the stairs. "Lily!" I screamed, dragging myself to my feet. I sprinted after it, my heart pounding in my chest. The creature moved with an unnatural grace, its long limbs propelling it up the stairs faster than should have been possible. By the time I reached the top, it was already at Lily's door. "Don't you touch her!" I yelled, throwing myself at its back. It staggered slightly under my weight, but it didn't fall. Instead, it reached back with one of its impossibly long arms, grabbing me by the collar and throwing me against the wall. The impact knocked the air from my lungs, and I crumpled to the floor, gasping. The creature turned back to Lily's door and slowly pushed it open. "Lily!" I wheezed, struggling to my feet. I grabbed a nearby lamp and charged, swinging it at the back of the creature's head. The lamp shattered on impact, and the creature let out a bone-chilling scream, a sound that was half roar, half wail. It turned to me, its red eyes blazing with fury. Before it could reach me, Lily's voice broke through the chaos. Leave my brother alone. I turned to see her standing on the bed, clutching a stuffed bear. She hurled it at the creature, and for a moment, it seemed confused, its head twitching as it stared at the toy. "Good children," it muttered, its voice softer now, almost wistful. It stepped back, its glowing eyes flickering like dying embers, and then with a sound like cracking ice, it crumpled in on itself, collapsing into a pile of ash and tattered fabric. The air grew warmer, the stench fading, leaving only silence. I rushed to Lily, pulling her into my arms. She clung to me, trembling but unharmed. "What was that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know," I said, holding her tight. "But it's gone now." We stayed there until dawn, too afraid to move. When the first rays of sunlight streamed through the window, I ventured downstairs. The living room was as we'd left it, except for the fireplace. The soot-streaked bricks were cracked, and in the ashes of the hearth lay a single, jagged tooth, glinting in the morning light. We never spoke of that Christmas again. But every year, when the snow falls and the lights twinkle, I can't help but glance at the chimney, wondering if it's truly over, or if one day that thing will crawl back down, still searching for the good children.